Alright, so hey there everybody, Andrew King here, NWC Webinars and Canadian Musician Magazine. Thrilled to have you join us for Home Recording 101. We've been looking forward to this one. Joining me, and I'll introduce him in just a moment, is Adam Gallant, the owner and operator of the Hill Sound Studio in Charlottetown, PEI. A few things to let you know about before we get started. And first, I'm just going to launch a poll here, basically asking in which capacity you're involved in the music industry, and ultimately this is going to help us steer tonight's session, but also just give us a better idea as to who's joining and help us tailor this content going forward for future sessions. So take a moment, and we'd love to get your input. Yeah, looking like the majority performing and recording artists, which is what we'd expect, and actually cool that lots of songwriters as well, folks working behind the scenes. Yeah, so we'll take another 10 seconds here. While you're finishing that up, we'll share these results momentarily. A couple of things to let you know about at the end of the session. I think about 24 hours from now, you'll get a follow-up email that has a link to where you can access a full recording of the session. In the handout section here as well, we've got a PDF of the slideshow that we're going to show. So if you want to access that now, you'll have time to print it out, and if you're old school like me, you can jot down some notes there, or even just to have it for reference from here on out. It'll help you make the most of the session. And we've got about 85% that have input on the poll here, so let's close it up and we'll let you see who we've got joining us here. So good, a good mix across the industry. That's great. One more thing to let you know about too, musicbooksplus.com is our sister company. If you go to musicbooksplus.com/recording, we've got some tips there to help you make the most of your webinar experience. There's also a few recording-based titles that we've got to basically just help bolster the content that we're going to talk about now. If you want to read more about home recording, home studios, some titles that our team has chosen for you. Lastly, we're going to open this up to questions about halfway through. Going to do a short question period. We'll take a break. We'll kind of favor questions that pertain to something we've already touched on, the timely ones. If, of course, though, feel free to ask anything. We'll probably be able to get to most of them. If we miss any, fret not, because at the end, we're going to open it up for a longer Q&A. And so if we miss you at the break, stay put. We'll be able to get to a lot more at the end. And all that said, I think that covers everything. Why don't we jump into this? Okay, so as I said, my name's Andrew. I'm the editor of Canadian Musician, as well as a few other magazines. I've been hosting NWC webinars for about a year now. If you go to nwcwebinars.com, you can check out all of our previous ones. And beside me, who's remained patient and silent, Adam Gallant, owner-operator of the Hill Sound Studio in Charlottetown. As far as music, Paper Lions, Sorrey, Coyote, just a few names that he's had fingerprints on the recordings over the last few years. Done a lot of work with the CBC, National Film Board, Location Audio. He writes for both Canadian Musician and our sister publication, Professional Sound. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Adam, thanks a ton for joining us.
Hi, how's everyone doing? Hello, I'm Adam. I've got about maybe 15 years experience working in the music industry. I started at Nova Scotia Community College, and I freelanced for many years until I came around to launching my own business and starting my own studio about 3 years ago.
Bang on. And yeah, a lot of gear reviews come out of the Hill. Adam's done a number of instructional type pieces for us, and just knowing him personally, I thought this was a great opportunity, a great person to kind of introduce us to the world of home recording. So let's jump into it here. We want to talk, first of all, kind of cover the basics. I should apologize too. I had my wisdom teeth pulled a few days ago, so hopefully I'm doing my best at enunciating with a semi-frozen face. Yeah, so we've got some of the components listed here, but basic setup. Adam, if you're going to start recording yourself, and say it's even just guitar vocal kind of setup, what are the things you're going to need to have in place to do that effectively?
I'd say the first thing that the home recordist needs is obviously a computer. Like everyone has a laptop. Most laptops come today with either GarageBand or maybe you've got like Windows Media Recorder there. That's how I started back in junior high, was with Media Recorder, that very simple program in Windows XP. I had a lot of fun with that. In terms of today, an interface would be your next best place to focus. Often interfaces actually come with a little bit of software to not only drive the ins and outs, but it's also they'll come with software that will store audio and you can edit with and all that kind of stuff. I think PreSonus has a line of interfaces that extend from Pro to prosumer to home studio, and that comes with Studio One is I think what their digital audio workstation is called. So the basics, yeah, you definitely need a decent computer, an interface that's going to get you plugged in. Obviously, like you need a microphone coming into your computer, and the interface will facilitate that. And the DAW is just the software that allows you to manage and edit the audio that you're storing on the computer. In terms of microphones, they're everywhere. Like when I started, I think I was just using a very cheap, like little PC plastic, 3.5 millimeter microphone, and now obviously there's little microphones built into people's laptops. When I was starting out demoing or songwriting, I was definitely using the built-in mic on my MacBook because it was just right there, and I was using GarageBand because it was right there. And GarageBand now has gotten to a point where it's extremely flexible, extremely powerful, and free. So that's pretty amazing. In terms of playback, people are listening to their earbuds 99% of the time. So if you can't afford nice big studio monitors, use your earbuds and just check it in the car. But definitely nice to have a couple of even small studio monitors to play back, just to kind of get the vibe going and get excited about the music you're creating.
Mm-hmm. So I guess going back over these points then, first off for the DAW, your digital audio workstation, Adam mentioned a couple. There's GarageBand, the more elaborate Apple product, which is Logic, Pro Tools, and Steinberg's Cubase, probably up there for industry standards. Is there a way, like, how do you try and figure out which of these might be best for you?
Ooh, that's a good question. It depends. I would say if you intend on having clients or you're growing your home studio because you want to invite people in and create with them, I would say that you would start out with something maybe that had a bit more professional edge, a professional look. And for me, that's Pro Tools. Another thing that Pro Tools offers is that it's like ubiquitous amongst studios, so you can take your project and give it to a professional mixer, and he can just open the Pro Tools session. So I would also, if you're hosting clients or you really want to have an interchange of content to professional studios, Pro Tools would be what I would suggest personally.
Mm-hmm.
If you're at home and you're creating music for yourself and it's going to stay with you, or you're going to release it commercially, but the actual multi-track sessions aren't going to go anywhere, you could use anything that works. And I would say start with GarageBand if you're new, because it's a great way to cut your teeth, and it's designed in such a way that it's really inviting and really creative.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, yes, like Studio One, like I mentioned, from PreSonus, and Logic, those are kind of your standard kind of like stepping stones into what I would say is Pro Tools, which for me is the kind of the holy grail.
Yeah, no, and not to, you can't knock GarageBand. Grimes, a friend of the magazine, done entirely in GarageBand, and that went on to be one of the most heralded recordings of the year. And then yeah, microphones too. Like again, if you're demoing, you can really be using anything, as long as it captures that inspiration, something that you can go back to later. But one of the things we promised people with this session, I suppose, was getting that kind of professional quality level from home base. So considering that, if you want to make something that's going to compete with a professionally done recording in any sense, what do you need to have handy? And I guess we can kind of take drums off the table. Recording drums is an entirely new monster, and one we might revisit in a later session. But taking drums off the table, when you're talking voice and main instruments, your guitar, bass, keyboard, what should you have? Maybe one or two basics for microphones.
Cool. The one thing that I think most engineers would tell you that you need in your studio is an SM57.
Right.
And you know, like huge albums are recorded with SM57s, and tiny home recordings are done with SM57s. People swear by them, big pros and home users. There's a nice thing about dynamic mics is that they're not extremely sensitive. So if you don't have an amazing sounding room, you're kind of generally better off with a dynamic mic that's not going to really get you that detailed picture. It's going to kind of hug the focus a bit more than than a pencil condenser or something like that. So I would suggest everybody who's recording at home, if you're making your very first microphone purchase and you want to compete with the professionals, buy an SM57 because it's ubiquitous. Like people record vocals on it, people record acoustic guitar on it. I've been reverting back to it for acoustic guitars this past few months, actually, which is kind of weird. We have a few vintage small diaphragm condensers that I've used in the past, and they're powerful and they're big, but sometimes you just need the acoustic guitar to kind of sit in a little pocket. And for some reason, for me lately, that the SM57 has been supplying that. I just run it into a tube preamp, and it's been sounding sweet.
Mm-hmm. Large diaphragm condenser?
Yes, I'd say if you can get a little kind of vocal booth tucked away in your room, a large diaphragm condenser, it's kind of amazing how great sounding some of the cheap ones can even be if they're tailored to your voice. My suggestion would be go to the music store, and maybe you want to rent a few of them and just try them out, cycle through them. Like large diaphragm condensers, they're detailed, they can be crisp, they can give you lots of high end that may or may not be what you're going for in terms of you know, competing with the pros. Yeah, you're definitely going to want that kind of detail on your voice, and sometimes that detail is achieved in editing and comping, and sometimes it's from the source and the performance, and sometimes it's a marriage of both of those things. It's just kind of just about doing it. But a great large diaphragm condenser, the one I've been using lately that's very mid-grade, that I've had great success with, is a Sennheiser MK4. And basically, if the vocalist wants a real nice amount of clarity and power, that's what I'll put up in front of them.
It's right behind your head, and actually, we haven't given people a look at the studio yet. Yeah. So here, Adam and I in the control room of the Hill, and I can't see our reference window, but
hello. Here's the Sennheiser.
Yeah, large diaphragm condenser on a shock mount. It's basically just total isolation. You can set it on a stand, and it's going to be, I guess, immune to environmental impact, shake, and yeah, great for the voice. Instruments?
Yes, I'll put that on acoustic guitar, absolutely.
Okay.
You'll end up, like I end up kind of carving off low end, but I do that with the 57 anyway. This will represent like the full spectrum. I think people consider like a large diaphragm mic to extend further into the low end or represent low end better than a small diaphragm condenser. Okay. It's basically the same technology, just a smaller capsule on the end. Like there, you kind of see the size of the capsule in there. It's a particularly nice mic. I think it's about $400. And yeah, you definitely need the shock mount for any kind of condenser mic because they're susceptible to transmission, low end transmission, like rumble from the mic stand.
Yeah, bang on. And we can bounce back to this when need be. So yeah, we talked about the basics here. This is a very subjective question, I suppose, but we've got Adam here. So yeah, say you've only got a finite amount of money to put to this at the beginning. You know, you're going from 0 to 60. You've never recorded yourself, and you want to start, investing your time and money into actually producing a good product. Of all the components we just discussed, like you mentioned the SM57 as being kind of go-to, and that's a relatively inexpensive microphone. So, if you've got a few $100, where are you going to shell out? What component is maybe more important to have something beyond entry level? Whereas, like we said, with the workstation, you could easily be using GarageBand, which comes standard with most Apple products.
Yeah, great question. I would say, if it were me personally, my money would be pointed towards a good dynamic microphone. That would be the SM57. Mm-hmm. A pop filter so that you can use it on your voice if you need to, and an interface because you've got to be able to route in and out of your computer with balanced connections, meaning that you're using cabling that's not going to introduce a lot of noise and you're going to get clean sounds, basically.
Bang on. So here, let's move on, and we're going to open it up for questions shortly here. Feel free to start submitting those now, though. We can get them in the queue, and feel free to ask anything. Again, if it's not pertinent to something we're talking about now, that doesn't mean we can't jump to it at the end. So we'd love to hear what's on your mind. But here we go. We're talking about the room now. So you've got the setup. Home studio, quote unquote, there's various degrees here. In some cases, it's people recording in their bedroom closets. Here we are at Adam's room, a designated outbuilding on his property that's entirely dedicated to recording. So, maybe won't be at that level yet, but say you've got, your typical, quote unquote, typical 2-bedroom home. Where's a good spot to kind of set up and call home base for a basic home studio?
For me, that place is anywhere I feel like I can be creative. Like the space is such a huge part of where like the passion and the performance can come from for people. So park yourself where you feel comfortable. Like park yourself somewhere where you don't feel like maybe people can hear you. Obviously, for your own kind of creative, or for me at least, my own creative kind of comfort and privacy. But also a place where you're not going to disrupt your neighbors. That's another big consideration. Yeah, I would say my top priority in terms of spaces are just creating a space or working in a space that's conducive to being creative. So someplace where I can adjust the lighting. Maybe I want to dim the lights. Maybe there's Christmas lights up. I just want to set the vibe. Maybe I like nice rugs. I want to feel warm and cozy and that kind of stuff. Just where I feel like I can get creative. The number one priority for me in terms of space is that it harbors creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it would be like, yeah, how does it sound? Next is the sound. Does the space sound decent? What needs to happen to make it sound good? And am I disrupting others, or are others going to disrupt the recording or the sound?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in that order, that would be how I would approach that question.
So here we go. We're going out of order, but we just had a question that leads us beautifully into the next point. Ed asks, what's a good sound treatment material or solution if he's looking to build his own panels? And I guess we're going to kind of roll right into that, because as far as basic room treatment, so you've chosen your space. What are some really easy ways that you can employ to get it sounding good, or at least optimal for vocal and instrumental recording?
So building your own panels, something I've done many, many times. A good treatment material. The inside of your panels, what I've done in my latest build was Roxel Comfort Board. You can get it from Home Depot. It's basically like a compressed version of pink insulation, but it's made out of like rocks, and it's really rigid, and you can kind of frame it in a box and put burlap around it. So there's basically 3 ingredients to your DIY paneling: the insulation, the wrap, and the frame. So the insulation, like I said, for me, my last one was, yeah, you can have a look at them here. For me, my last build was the comfort boards, the Roxel comfort boards, but I have used Roxel comfort bats in the past, and I have used just straight up pink insulation in the past. That worked well. And then I just wrapped those in wood and wrapped the wood in burlap. It's as simple as that. Some of them are prettier than others. Our nicest ones that we built are hanging on the ceiling right now, and they are framed in mitered wood, and they look all right. They're presentable for clients.
Yeah, I'd say we gave you a quick look at the very solution he's talking about on the wall. And actually, I love this. This one's gotten us all kinds of questions that we'll jump to later. I'll admit I had to look up what gobo meant, but Adam had recommended, if you're looking, again, quick and dirty to get rolling and produce something that sounds very good, you said, grab a couple of gobos and get rolling. Please explain to those of us less savvy what you mean.
So gobo is just a movable panel that you use to block sound. It's way easier to build 2 small gobos and kind of record your guitars or your amps kind of encapsulated in these 2 panels than it is to like treat your entire room. So if you're like, I need to start recording tomorrow and I want it to be decent, and you're not going to hang a dozen panels on your walls, make all those holes in your walls, or you need something that's modular because you've got a multi-purpose space, a gobo is the perfect solution, and you'll get great sound from your source recorded material. It doesn't address any issues with playback, but having those movable panels, super flexible. I used two in our Studio B room. We used two huge ones in the A room where we build a vocal booth, and they're just movable versions of those same panels. They're packed with pink insulation. In our case, they can be packed with any insulation. They're wrapped in burlap. They're framed in wood, and they're basically just movable and very usable.
Yeah, okay, so we're at questions, and we're just going to keep rolling because most of the questions are on this. A comment from Jamie, thanks for this. He says Roxel is better than 703 because it's less toxic and irritant.
I have no experience with 703, but that sounds cool. Roxel, for me, the reason I chose it was because it was accessible. So I wasn't able to get 703 shipped to where we are, and Home Depot had the Comfort bats or Comfort board in stock, so that's why I went there.
Right on. Great question from Lance too. So how do you decide where your panels are going to be mounted in your space?
For me, I don't think too much about it. I'm not very clinical about the treatment. I just say, like, as long as they're sounding good, they're doing their job. But there's a few techniques that you can look up online. There's like a live end, dead end approach where you put all of your baffling kind of encapsulated at the sound end where the speakers are, basically saying that if your speakers are at one end, that's where you're going to put the majority of your treatment, so that you're kind of hugging the sound source and treating that end of the room. And in the back end of your room, you don't need to focus too much of your expense on that. Obviously, you want to put panels at reflection points, meaning like you sit in your listening position and you get someone to basically pull up a mirror and walk along the side, and you wait until you can see your speaker in the mirror, and that's where you're going to put a panel, because right there is where your first reflections are going to come off the speaker, and you can really clarify your stereo image by putting panels right at this point where your speakers reflect from initially.
Bang on. And Jamie had just asked about seeing the ceiling solutions that Adam was just talking about. So that's what you just saw. Figure we kill two birds with one stone. This is great. Let's keep rolling here. I guess we kind of touched on this, but just to be specific, Jim's asking, what are some easy and inexpensive ways to build a vocal isolation booth?
Yeah, that's a great question. It would be, for me, this exact kind of thing, like just basically building a box out of wood that's the size of a pink insulation bat, wrapping it in burlap, and putting it on hinges, maybe if you want it, and attaching it to the wall, attaching it to a stud. And then you have this thing you can open and close that's got burlap and insulation in it. For us, our vocal booth is a 8-foot by 3 or 4 foot standing piece of like wooden frame, basically, that's full of pink insulation, and we just have two of those standing side by side, and they get anchored by amps, and they're not very pretty, but they work really, really well for clarifying vocals, focusing vocals, reducing high end reflection, and making a real intimate sound, which is ultimately, that's like a real challenge for home recordists. Some people, you could put a jacket over your head and sing into a microphone, and that'll give you that intimacy, but obviously not the comfort or the performance aspect you might need. But basically, reduce high-end reflection. Sing in a closet, go into your linen closet and track there. That's one very expensive way to get a really dead sounding experience from the vocals.
Cool. We'll take two more questions and then we'll move on. Although I guess technically it's three because two folks asked the exact same question, which is bass traps. Any ideas for an easy to put together bass trap, and where do you go about positioning those?
So bass traps are the same principle, but more insulation and denser insulation. So the panels, I'll use two 1-inch or two 2-inch thick pieces of comfort bat. The bass trap traditionally is placed in the corner and consists of much more insulated material. So basically, as much as you're willing to sacrifice space, you pack in with as much rigid foam insulation as you can, or in my case, rigid Roxel, this comfort bat. People will often cut them into triangles, cut sheets into triangles and stack those triangles up along the corners of their walls, and that will totally absorb all that resonance that starts to build up in the corners of your room.
Mm.
It's not something I've done, and my room isn't amazingly balanced. The ceiling is quite nicely balanced, and it is balanced front to back. But if you stood in the corner, if you stood right at the back of the room, you'll feel a big bump in the low end. And we just kind of, we check our mixes in the car, we check our mixes in a bunch of other systems just to make sure that we feel confident about the low end. And then after a certain amount of time passes, you do enough mixes in the room, you just start to understand where the bass wants to sit in your mix.
So here, last question of this portion. Again, there are a few in the queue here, and we'll jump to those later on, so bear with us. We're getting into physics here, so Adam, I hope I'm not throwing too much at you here. But Desi says, my speakers sound great, but when I sit back to the opposite wall, they sound even better with serious bass. How can I get the whole room to sound like that?
Interesting. I would say that you don't necessarily want your whole room to sound like that. You want your room to sound as flat as possible, is the tradition in mixed environments. Basically, that you're just trying to create a flat EQ curve at the listening position. My suggestion is that if you love that feeling of that bass and that low end on playback, crank up the low end on your speakers and play it back like that, and adjust your mixing accordingly. Like if you enjoy the sound of that on playback, just go enjoy it. Don't just do it, and then adjust your mixes accordingly, and check your mixes elsewhere. Is there too much low end? Is there not enough?
We'll call it the Beats by Dre corner of your room. But yeah, like Adam says, that's a very pleasing mix, but at the same time, he's saying you want it flat because when you're checking, when you're referencing your material, you've got to think that this is going to be played back on countless devices in countless environments. And so you're basically trying to get an objective a picture as possible of what you're hearing. But then again, crank it up and go stand back there and jam when you need to.
Yeah, get creative and enjoy it.
Right on. So here we go. We've kind of set up the basics, the gear, the room, some great questions. Thanks a ton, you guys. This is going very well. So resources outside of Home Recording 101 presented by NWC Webinars featuring Adam Gallant from the Hill Sound Studio in Charlottetown. Adam, what are some other good sources of information for people that are, looking to expand their knowledge about this? I mean, obviously there's some great schools, institutes, recording programs, and you certainly can't knock a formal education from some of these revered studios or institutes. But for the DIY, there's a ton of information on the internet. Not all of it is good. There's a lot of books, DVDs out there. Like, tell us a little bit about, at least in your experience, and maybe we'll start with the web. What are some good sources for folks to get learned?
The place that turns up in my search results the most would be Sound on Sound. It's a little Pro Tools focused, and often the searching I'm doing is for Pro Tools. But Sound on Sound has really great product reviews, great tutorials on software, and just a lot of educational material there. And again, they'll have lots of articles about room treatment and all that kind of stuff. That would be the kind of number one thing that would come up for me on the web. And then next up would be Gear Sluts, which is full of everybody who's into recording, from really, really huge names post on there, and the rest of the world too. Other places, Pro Tools Expert is an online forum that I am going to quite often. Basically every day something comes up in my feed from Pro Tools Expert that's interesting to me, which is amazing on their part. Another free one, Pensado's Place. These guys create tutorials. They're called Into the Lair. They mix pop music mostly. There's two gentlemen that are the hosts of this show. They also give lots of interviews with real big producers and engineers who will give you all their trade secrets.
All right on. Yeah, the Pro Tools site that he mentioned, I guess it bears mentioning too that a lot of the DAWs, I know Steinberg and Avid Pro Tools in particular, but they've got like forums off of the main website that have a lot of great information, and that's moderated by those companies too. So it's a bit more specific to the product, but I have seen some good kind of calls out for help on things that go beyond just DAW operation that are there. So yeah, we talked about some of the free places, some of the forums, some of the resource pools. Paid, I mean, we don't want to throw out too much of an endorsement for folks because there's a lot out there. But Adam, you said that you've been taking advantage of the Mix with the Masters initiative lately.
Yeah, there's a website that kind of just came up for me in the last year. It's called Mix with the Masters, and it's very famous mix engineers interviewed about workflow, and they'll deconstruct a mix in some of the videos. It is a subscription-based site. I think we paid maybe $300 US for a year subscription, which it's kind of a luxury to feel like I was willing to invest in that. But they're really life-changing to see how, like, the person who mixed Adele, how do they set up their mix session, and what plugins are their go-to plugins, and to see how they route and process their stuff is pretty amazing, especially for us. Like, we live in Charlottetown, PEI, and there's a very small number of people who work in our industry here. So I don't go to big conferences or anything like that. So it's hard for me to know what are the kind of standard forms of practice for mixing and editing and workflow in general for production. So Mix with the Masters has been a kind of a game changer for me, which is so great.
Yeah, Jamie asked, and I, again, we're kind of going out of turn here, but is Mix with the Masters, did they do the 2-week program in France too, south of France?
That's them, yeah.
Right.
Same guys.
Another professional sound and Canadian musician contributor, Sean Bradley, based in Ottawa, actually had the chance to do that a couple of years ago and came back just singing his praises. So I think it's a pretty elite opportunity, but if you can take advantage, well, there you go. And another one, Joe Mullen, another contributor of ours, Joe Down Studios, has been really into Nail the Mix lately. I forget the guys' names that run that, but it's 3 younger engineers from the States, do a lot of like rock and metalcore kind of stuff. But again, very hands-on, very behind the scenes. Here are raw tracks that we've been working with by bands that you'd have heard of. Give it a shot. We'll assess your mix. So, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there. Ultimately, it's going to be on you to kind of vet them and make sure that it's something reputable, something with good user feedback, especially if you're paying for it. But the bottom line here, as Adam just said, Charlottetown, PEI, it's a small community, but still there's probably a lot of sharing of information, music and by extension audio. I think by and large, there's a lot of camaraderie in these industries, and not a lot of people kind of hoarding trade secrets. I think by and large, when you're passionate about music, when you're passionate about audio, that's kind of shared among other people. So you and your peers can always be exchanging information and relying on one another for responses. Am I onto something?
Yeah, totally. That's the case, and it's cool to see like the real big pros and the real big names just giving you that advice straight up. So that's why, Mix with Masters for me has been a game changer.
Bang on. So here, I'm going to step out for a sec because Adam had put together, some quick lists on, first off, we build this again as top quality tracks from home. So he came up with a few bullet points of things you can put into practice right away that are just going to exponentially boost your finished product, or at least your workflow. Take us through some of these suggestions you've got to help people optimize what they're doing.
Great. So when I say edit to the grid, I mean create a metronome in your DAW and play along to it. If you want a tempo change, just build it into the session and follow along to the click track. And then once you're done with that performance, go through and line up all the transients with the grid. So if it feels like your kicks and snares are behind or ahead, or if you zoom in and see that they're behind or ahead on those grid markers where your beats are supposed to land, just cut and line all that stuff up. We spend a lot of time like editing to the grid early on when you do bed tracks, and the results are far beyond any other workflow change we've done in the last 5 years. Now it's a big part of how we make music. It's just you cut the drums, and then the drums get edited to the grid, and then people are overdubbing on top of that. And again, you're checking in on all those overdubs. Is the guitar landing right with the kick drum and snare? Editing to the grid is like how you get clarity out of your mix. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, and it's sometimes very monotonous, but it has been for me the number one improver of the quality of the stuff we've been doing, is just editing things to the grid. Next up, be musicians, best musicians. I'm sure maybe this can be a tough one, is because at least for me personally, I want to play all the instruments on my own recordings. So giving away that control to a musician can sometimes be tough. A lot of people have friends who are just keen on taking a part in a creative project. So there are people who don't necessarily wish to be paid or want to be paid, or they don't ever want to pursue a career as a musician. And my suggestion is, if there's people that want to be a part of it, that you just go ahead and invite them in, and make them a part of the collaboration. Being collaborative and opening your doors to musicians and other creators is a real great way to get quality stuff happening, because ultimately these really big hits and these big pro songs that we hear that sound amazing, they're fueled by people who are totally dialed into being creative and getting emotional, and kind of like shedding all the other stuff from their lives away and focusing in and really specializing on the performance of what they're doing and the quality of the orchestration and the parts and all that kind of stuff and the musicianship. So I would say bring in your friends if they're good musicians, and enjoy the creative experience with them. Another thing I'd say is hire a producer. Sure, you want to cut it all at home. That's great. Maybe you want to bring in a producer to do some pre-production, or maybe you want to hire a producer to mix the final version of what you're doing. There's no harm in that. Again, it's kind of more about being collaborative and sharing that creative experience with other people.
Right.
Another one, this one's just ubiquitous, and when I first started, I was kind of against it, but now I use pitch correction in a few different ways. I only use it really when it's either creative or I feel that the artist needs it, because it's distracting and the pitch is taking me out of the emotion of the song. So I'd say I use pitch correction in a couple ways. One way I would use pitch correction is if I'm doing something for myself where I'm singing. I'm not a very good singer at all. I sing flat all the time. I'll do a take and I'll pitch correct the take, and I'll pump it into my headphones, and I'll sing along to the pitch corrected take.
Yeah.
And then I get rid of the pitch corrected take, and I listen to that one that I sang along to the pitch corrected version of. And it's generally like, 5% closer. It gets me a little closer to what I'm on. So if you don't want to use pitch correction or you hate it, you can just use it as kind of this vocal coach by doubling your pitch corrected self and see how you make out. That's kind of how I got into using pitch correction, and now I just use it because it makes people sound better and it makes me sound better, and I'm not afraid of that, and it's creative and fun, and now I kind of enjoy augmenting performances with pitch correction.
Bang on. Leave it to me to find a way to talk about myself, but my first recording experience was with Adam. He helped me record a song for my wedding, and yeah, pitch correction. It's great because you can take a take that you're really stoked on, and if there's one little part in there that kind of steals the magic from the rest, it can just easily be ironed out, and you're left with all the good parts of it. I specifically remember the instance where I came back, I was like, can you fix this maybe? And it's like, oh, glorious.
Yeah, if the emotion is there, you want to preserve it.
Bingo. And yeah, don't be afraid. You don't have to go full Akon. And yeah, a few more here. I guess just to keep the train running. There was more. I'd asked Adam for some tips. Things that might not be in the typical 101, but that you can use to, again, just kind of make your product sound that much better with not that much work.
Yeah, so scheduling the sessions, giving yourself enough time to go through the workflow. For me, it's about scheduling time to edit. That's a big one. It's like putting in the time, I guess, is maybe a better way to say that one. Is like you want your stuff to sound more professional. The pros are spending 3 days on the tracking and mixing a song. That shouldn't be kind of a stretch for me either, to just sink in that time. Like, yeah, I'm going to put in 2 hours and edit these drums right now. And I scheduled it and I made time, and I don't have to feel like I'm rushing. Mm-hmm. To feel like you can truly enjoy the process and feel like with every step of the process, it's great. And for me, scheduling that time and putting the time aside is a big part of that. The next thing on the list says playlist. This is kind of more of a Pro Tools thing, and it's kind of more about compiling takes. So if I'm working alone without a producer or an engineer, I just tend to do 1,000 takes from top to bottom over and over again, and I generally kind of don't get anywhere. I just kind of end up repeating myself a lot. But one thing I have found is if I record a take and then I create a new playlist. In Pro Tools, it just means you're switching over the same track. It just hides the one you just recorded and reveals a new one. If I do that and then take after take, I kind of just create a huge list of takes, generally about 5 or 6 takes, and then I view them all. I cycle through all these playlists of takes, and I just cut them all up, and I use the best words from the best takes. So maybe that should be saying like comps or compiling takes. Like I always say, when I first started recording, I was always about kind of getting the take from top to bottom, and then like as I more and more got into the industry, and like after 10 years, I realized like that's a huge waste of time. And your best bet is to, through the use of playlists and Pro Tools, edit together the magic moments from all of your takes, because then you're using the best of the best. And again, it comes down to kind of editing and making good decisions. Next one here says versatile channel strip. This is super. This is like a real big help for me, and it took me a while to really feel like I had the kind of the cash to invest in a good channel strip. Having something that can do like that you can drive, that has distortion, that you can also kind of have clean, is great. Something that has equalization in it, so that you feel like you can color the sound on the way in. Something that has compression. I always like to compress on my way into the computer somewhat aggressively at times, because I know I'm going to want it to sound like that anyway in the end. And I just kind of get comfortable with feeling like, you know, feeling like I can crush something or not crush something. So having a versatile channel strip means like you've invested your money in one input into your computer that you can do a lot with, as opposed to getting like that 8-channel interface, but you're only recording vocals and acoustic guitar predominantly, whereas you could have put your money into just one strong channel as opposed to the 8 XLRs you had there. I'd obviously just focus in on getting one really great channel, because you're going to end up overdubbing one instrument at a time generally. In terms of don't touch that dial, this refers to mixing. This is a big one that I learned from.
That's a shout out to our friends Paper Lions, one of Adam's mainstay clients, and actually their guitar player Colin Buchanan, regularly working out of the Hill Sound Studio, and just generally good dudes. Don't touch that dial. Paper Lions, full color. Go on.
Yes. This refers to refers to Paper Lines, and other refers to a video I watched from a mixer, Peter Tran, I think is his name. I'm probably getting that wrong. Who suggested leaving your volume knob in a fixed position while you mix. So you'll hear people suggesting that you listen quiet and that you listen loud, or that you don't do either of those things. But lately what I've been doing is when I go to mix, I pull up my volume knob and I leave it in one position. And now I have this fixed variable where I know if something's too loud or quiet, because this threshold in my mind is there. And if I turn up the volume, that threshold's been changed. So generally if I'm doing a mix, I'll dial up my volume nice and loud, do the full mix, spend a few hours on it, and then take a break, come back, listen quiet. But I try to, while I'm making changes in my mix, I leave that volume in one position, because it's one less variable for me to think about. So I kind of always have this threshold where I know if something's too loud or too quiet, because the volume is consistent on playback. And that kind of comes back to, make decisions based on an emotional response. If it feels right, go with it. And if it doesn't feel right, listen to that voice. I think early on when I started, I would have this feeling like something's not right. And then I would just be like, no, I'm just going to push forward and ignore the feeling that something's not right. I think if you have that feeling like something's not right, you got to figure it out and fix it and then move forward. And things are going to sound way better when you realize, why am I feeling uncomfortable about this? Or why I was feeling really great, and then go down that road. That's another one. If things are feeling good, keep doing what you're doing. And if you're responding emotionally to your content, that's a great sign.
Okay, so here we are near the end. Questions, comments, concerns, hopefully more of the first two. But let's roll. And there's some great ones here. Are you good to run the gamut? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll answer what we can. But here, let's start with Jamie, just because it goes back to channel strips. Can you explain what a channel strip is?
Oh, yeah.
Give some examples.
Great question. Channel strip is an input into your computer. So you have one channel or two channels, and the strip is just the signal path that it follows. So when I talk about a channel strip, I'm generally talking about a preamp. So whatever is going to power your microphone or turn up the gain on your microphone. And that might be it. Some people will just go in with that, just one microphone volume in. Like you see those ARC tube pre's. I've got a few of those poking around. They make they make an appearance every now and again when we cut drums on like a bottom snare mic or a room mic, just because you turn up the volume on that little tube preamp and you can color it a bit. For me, the channel strip that we use here in Studio A it's like an API lunchbox preamp. It's an XLR input. It's also got a 1/4" input. And it's just basically gain for the mic, and then from that preamp is fed into a separate module on the lunchbox, which is a compressor. It's a Neve 543 compressor limiter that controls the volume. And then after that, I sometimes will send it to line into like a Universal Audio 610, where I'll shave the EQ in there. I'll maybe push the volume so it hits the tube on that preamp a bit. And then there's another gain reduction stage on the LA610. So the strip for me is the API, the Neve, the LA610, and then it goes into my Pro Tools system from there. Just a line level input.
Right on. Here, why not go back to video so you can see the studio and Ken won trouncing. Shouldn't wear a hat. But, we're Canadian. We only have one team to cheer for. So going back to room treatment here, Jamie's wondering, and he mentions Auralex specifically, but this is actually kind of timely because in the next edition of Canadian Musician, Adam has reviewed Prime Acoustics Broadway 12 room kit. So similar, I guess the question then is how effective is, are the retail solutions, Auralex, Prime Acoustic, isoacoustic stuff compared to the DIY panels?
Specifically the Auralex stuff, I haven't used, I've never worked with it, but I've entered into like rehearsal spaces where it's hung on the walls and it cuts in high-end reflection very well. The research I've done on Auralex says that there's not as much low-end absorption. So if it were me, I would suggest if you're a home recordist and budget is a concern, your DIY panels might be a better solution. If budget isn't a concern, then yeah, I would just totally go out and buy some Prime Acoustic stuff, or I think there's another company, AHS or something, that make full kits, room kits. But I would say Auralex, I would build 2 gobos for $100 sooner than I would buy $100 of Auralex, personally. But that's just me.
Yeah. This is a good one. It's kind of, Jacob, sort of the, I was going to say age old, but it's not age old. It's kind of more recent, but it's very much the, one of the hot topics of the industry and has been for a few years. But Jacob asked, do you find that you trust VSTs enough to invest a decent amount of money in them for the long run, or do you consider analog gear better for longevity?
Longevity, that's interesting. Yes, for longevity, I would say hardware is better. But VSTs, and for us, Pro Tools, it's AXX, I think, or AAX, I don't remember. The best investment we make and the most exciting thing that we put money into is plugins. And one of the things through the Mix with the Masters stuff is that I see that all these big pro guys are using all these plugins that are available to us as well. So I would say we spend more on plugins than we do hardware. No, that's not true necessarily, but it's close. And plugins are really exciting, and the pros use them, and the pros swear by them. I would say do not veer away from plugins, and they're a great cheap way to add a real professional edge to your tracks, because you can go out and demo exactly the same plugins that like huge names are working with, and see if you like them, see how they work for you. Plugins, especially plugins that emulate hardware, those things, like pros love those things because they swear by them. I don't have a lot of experience, using huge, real high-end compressors, but you see these $10,000 boxes emulated in software for $300, and then you watch like a Mix with the Masters video and they're using it and they're saying, yeah, it's just as good as a real thing. It makes a lot of sense. But in terms of like a return on investment, plugins are hard to sell. Longevity, in 5 years, we're probably going to want a whole new plugin system, because that's just the nature of digital content. Like, you just want to update. Whereas if you buy that piece of hardware, it's probably going to be with you for your whole career. So we have a mix of both, a few really nice hardware items, but a real stock computer with lots and lots of really nice waves plugins. Yeah. And we do spend a lot on the plugins. Sound Toys, another great plugin bundle. The plugins too will also like really get the creative juices flowing. If you're going to spend a lot of time sitting there at the computer plugging in and working on the DAW, like there's no more feedback than the plugins, because they are just a whole palette of colors. So fun to use.
Yeah. Oh, let's stay in the box here. This one, I don't mean to dismiss, Alan, but you might have good luck in Google here with this too. But how much RAM do you want if you're recording and editing in the ballpark of 8 to a dozen tracks?
So 8 to a dozen tracks, 24-bit, 48K. Editing, I would say 4 gigs of RAM would do that without any problem. Yeah. For me, I have 16 gigs of RAM in our Studio B computer, 8 gigs of RAM in our Studio A computer, and they never, the Pro Tools never touches the RAM. It's the CPU that is a issue for us specifically. We really need a really powerful CPU to run this stuff, not necessarily RAM for me.
Okay, we're good with the next few then. Ed's wondering about sample rate and bit depth. It's kind of the industry standard there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we still record at 24-bit, 48K. That's how we record. And 99% of the projects I've received over the last 10 years are 24-bit, 48K.
There you go. Let's see here. And same, actually, this is something that you had suggested earlier that we didn't get to, but Nancy's wondering, do you have a built-for-purpose audio rack mount computer? Maybe we can just zoom out and talk a bit about, the PC that you're going to use for this.
Yeah, my PC's under the desk, so it's not really easy to look at, and it's dark under there. But it is a custom PC. Most people run Mac in this industry, but we have a Windows 8 machine right now that I built. I built 2 of these computers. The specs, the one that's in here right now, actually we just switched them yesterday, so I'm confused. Oh, wow. The one that's in here right now has 16 gigs of RAM. It's a 3.5 kilohertz or whatever it is, 3.5 gigahertz. I can't even say it. AMD processor, quad. Maybe it's got 6 cores in it, something like that. It's decently powerful. The old machine would be a 2.5, 6 core with 8 gigs of RAM. Not crazy powerful, but we do run into situations where we'll max out a mix session with plugins, and we have to start printing plugins to keep going forward, which is annoying.
Klaus, great question here. We'll get to that in a minute. And actually, I guess we can shut down the questions here because we've got 4 really good ones to get to. If you have something you're dying to ask, throw it out and we'll see, but maybe something that we can jump to afterwards. But yeah, latency in your monitors.
This is
Solutions?
A great question. Yeah, Solutions. Some monitors will have a mix where you can monitor the hardware instead of the software. So one suggestion is get an interface that has that blend option where you can listen to the hardware input and not the DAW input. In this situation, you would mute your channel that you're recording to in your DAW and switch your interface to listen to the hardware, and that would remove latency. Outside of that, like you want to check your DAW's software preferences to make sure the latency is as low as possible. If your computer starts to hiccup and it can't run at this low sample rate or this low buffer, you'll want to just start turning off your Wi-Fi, closing everything, and just allocating resources to just the recording software.
Okay. Headphones versus monitors, or maybe the question is headphones and or monitors, and beyond that, recommendations for good mixing headphones?
I don't personally mix on headphones, but a lot of people do, and you definitely have to check in headphones these days because everybody's listening to stuff in headphones. Right. I don't do it because of just general wear and tear of my ears. If I put them on, I tend to kind of push the volumes and my ears get tired, and I don't mix as long if I'm wearing headphones. But headphones to mix on, I would say your buds, because that's where everybody else is going to be listening to it. And I would say just reference them. Put your buds in, make the tweaks, take them out, and listen on your speakers. In terms of speakers, I would suggest that you get, I'm really liking these Yamaha HS5s I have in our other room. They're nice and small. Good for a small room.
In setting up your room, what do you do if you've got a big window? And we've got a small window.
Yeah, I have
it's a small window.
Yeah, which is just to let light in, basically. It's kind of a dungeon in here sometimes. Big window, big heavy drapes, which aren't cheap.
Yeah,
we did that in our B room. Just big heavy curtain rods,
oh
big
yeah,
heavy drapes.
right. And it works. It works.
It definitely works.
So here, last one, and it's a good one. Klaus is wondering about specific tips when it comes to brass instruments. Specifically, maybe we can just keep it to trumpet, or just for consistency's sake. But can you discuss the difference between using one mic versus several mics on the trumpet? Yeah, maybe just recording trumpet in your experience.
This is a great question. Recording trumpet is hard because it's very loud and it has a really harsh attack, and
True.
Often microphones just kind of just package it up in this tight little high thing, and it just punches you and it doesn't feel warm and doesn't feel natural. I have gotten around this by using a ribbon microphone. Ribbon microphones have the way they kind of get attacked with that initial transient from a trumpet is beautiful. It's perfect. You want to buy, like, there are some cheap ribbons out there. I've never tried working with them on trumpet, but I've used them on drums with no success. But I've used nice ribbon mics like a Royer on a drum kit. Sounds beautiful. On trumpet, it sounds incredible. For me, it's all about kind of getting a little further away from the instrument, making sure the space is very dead sounding. Like, you don't want all this high-end reflection, because that's where the true like clarity and punch of the instrument comes from. Right. But it needs that support from the low end. So don't roll off all the low end. Like, even though you might feel like there's no information down there, it's balancing out that high presence from the trumpet, which is often the problem area that people feel when they're listening back to trumpet. It's like, it's harsh. It's cutting my ears open. Yeah. So I would say use a ribbon mic. Do it in a nice warm room or a closet somewhere where there's not a lot of high end. And yeah, I would never, if I was just doing one trumpet track, I wouldn't put up two mics, because we have a small, tight little room here that we don't have like a nice big sounding space. So I wouldn't use like a room mic or anything, or a second mic generally. I generally just use one mic because phase coherency is great. And if it needs to sound like a little roomier, I just pull that one mic away. It's a lot easier and simpler, and I don't have to deal with blending two microphone sources, which can lead to phase issues.
Brilliant. I mentioned at the beginning, musicbooksplus.com/recording. There are some of the titles that you can find there. There's a few other suggestions, and again, some tips for making the most of this and future webinar experiences. On that note, we hope that you enjoyed this one. I've got to say, great questions. I can tell the engagement is there. I appreciate you sticking with me again with the slight lisp. I still can't totally close my mouth. And Adam Gallant, huge thanks. Oh, the camera's not on. Huge thanks to Adam. And there you go, some praise pouring in. Thanks a ton. Hill, what's URL? People want to check out the studio?
www.thehillsoundstudio.com. Or you can check us out on Instagram, The Hill Sound. That's kind of where I put most of our media.
Yeah, spot on. And again, killer client list. You know, we are in Atlantic Canada. It's a specific spot, but mixing, obviously Adam's a wealth of resources, and there's a good chance that if you need something done on your project and you're looking for someone approachable and obviously very talented, you don't have to say anything. I'll just keep pumping your tires here. So like I say, we will circulate a link to where you can access a recorded version of this. You can share it with your friends. But nwcwebinars.com, that's where you're going to be able to find it. You can check out all of our previous webinars we've done, all free. Everything on self-promotion to getting media coverage, finding a manager, record contracts. You know, do you need a record deal? And with all that, last but not least, there's going to be a survey that goes out as soon as we shut down here. Your feedback is invaluable. In addition to giving us the warm fuzzies, it's also great just to get suggestions on where you'd like to see us go in the future. This is our first kind of technically oriented seminar. Normally we focus on music industry, music business. But I think judging by the response we've got here, you will see more of these. So there we go. We're going to shut it down here. thehillsoundstudio.com, canadianmusician.com, nwcwebinars.com. Huge thanks and cheers to a good Thursday.